Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge, the podcast where we spend our lives in constant battle trying to fend off the forces of red internet bars, and it's all done without a producer, so sometimes I have to lean in a little bit, get all these microphones all set up the way I want them, but it's good to have you here. I hope those levels are okay. They seem a little low tonight. I don't know why. I don't know why any of this stuff happens the way it does, but looks like we've got some viewers here, as is always makes the show a little bit better. Got a little lighting improvement. That's something. And now I'm going to have to spend a minute trying to figure out just why these levels are as low as they are. That doesn't seem to be a good sign to me. Give me 1 second. I'm terribly sorry about this appalling lack of professionalism here. Let's have a peek. Let's see if this is something we can improve a little bit. How about that? Hey, that's an improvement. How's that? Hey, now. Yeah. Real guy would have done that before he started the show. Anyway, it's great to have everybody here. We got some great questions, as usual, from our fantastic Facebook page. Hi, everybody. Thanks to all the kind words from previous shows. It's always great to see people in the comment section saying hi. And as usual with the Stratosphere Lounge, we'll do, I don't know what we'll do. First, we'll fix the collar. And we'll probably do another, hour and a half like we did last time. I always have so much fun doing this, and it's a chance just to kind of kick back and sort of free associate. And as I said at the beginning of the show, it's also just amazing the quality of the questions that we get. And we got some really good ones tonight, so we'll get through as many of these as we possibly can. I suppose the thing to do is just get started. Internet connection speed looks good. If you're new to the show or new to Ustream, then you're in for a pleasant surprise. Ustream is awesome. It's absolutely free. It doesn't cost me anything, doesn't cost you anything, but they do place ads in the program. So if you haven't been here before and an ad comes up, I just generally keep talking because the show does get archived. It's being archived now. And when you play the show back, the ads will appear, but you can always back up and hear the content. And the other reason I don't stop for the ads, I found out after, I think, the second week, is that no one sees the ads at the same time. So I'm just going to bull on through and just click through them if you can, and it's the price of doing business right now. I think there's a chance that we might be able to pay for the streaming thing where we don't get the ads, and I'm looking into that, so that's hopefully downstream. But right now it's just a fun way to sit and talk to everybody, and let's take it from there. All right, we've got, as I said, some terrific questions, and about 90 minutes, 87 minutes to get through them, so we'll get started right now. Jet Atwood asked a question. I've been using an expression for a couple years now. There's a story in the Civil War. It's one of my favorite Civil War stories, and there's so many great Civil War stories, but this was a story came very late in the war. The war was basically winding down in the South, and up in the Shenandoah Valley where Stonewall Jackson had just routed the Union, just utterly destroyed them, stolen marches on them, appeared in their rear, blown some guy away, blew another guy away, there was a Union commander named Milroy, and the Union troops got known as Milroy's Weary Boys because Jackson just ran them ragged. Anyway, towards the end of the campaign where the Confederates had just owned the Shenandoah Valley, there was a battle called, I think it was 3rd Winchester. And in 3rd Winchester, the South attacked, and as usual, the North got wiped off the field, and everybody's retreating from the battlefield in confusion. So you have a 20-mile tail on this army, right? The first of the stragglers are 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 miles down the road running away from this battle. And the difference is that they had just assigned a new Union general to that army in the Shenandoah, and that general was Sheridan, Phil Sheridan. And General Sheridan wasn't made out of the same stuff as the previous guys. And as it happened, on the day of the attack, Sheridan was 15, 20 miles in the rear. He wasn't at the field. He was reporting something to, division headquarters or something like that. So Sheridan starts hearing these reports of this battle, and then he starts hearing reports that it's a rout and that they've been utterly thrashed and defeated. So Sheridan gets on his giant horse and makes Sheridan's famous ride, where Sheridan rides from 15, 20 miles back of the battle, gets on his horse, rides down this long, long line of incoming stragglers and people who've just been utterly routed, and they're full of fear. And traditionally in the Civil War and other wars, what the general would do in a case like that is he'd stand up and start screaming at the men, and Nathan Bedford Forrest used to whip them with the broadside of his sword and literally thrash guys. But Sheridan didn't do that. Sheridan got up in his saddle and he raised his hat and he gave him a big jaunty salute and said, "Fellas, why are you going this way? Let's just turn around. Let's go back up that road. Guys, we are going to whip them out of their boots today. We're going to whip them out of their boots." And people would turn around and go, oh, okay. If this guy says we're going to whip him out of their boots, then we'll whip him out of their boots. So as Sheridan starts moving forward towards the battle, he's got an army of former stragglers behind him. And as he gets to the actual battlefield, most of the line is still relatively intact. Same thing time and time and time again. Got up on his horse and said, boys, we are going to whip them out of their boots. I just like that expression so much that I've taken to using it, even though most people today don't use the expression whip them anymore, and hardly anybody ever wears boots. But everybody gets it. There's no problem understanding it. I do a lot of Tea Party speeches and a lot of little groups sometimes, and I always open or close by saying, my friends, we're going to whip them out of their boots. Well, Jet Atwood, wanted to know if I still thought we're going to whip them out of their boots. And Jet, we are going to whip them out of their boots. I think before Wisconsin, I was feeling better and better and better about it. But after Wisconsin, I am really convinced that we are going to whip these guys out of their boots. And I'll tell you why. You know, Barack Obama has a glamour, and glamour I mean in the traditional word, not in the sense of being like good looking or well dressed or anything, or a nice smile. He has a glamour in the traditional meaning of the word, which means he casts a spell. Glamour was a spell that was cast by various kinds of supernatural creatures, and the thing about a glamour was that a glamour would usually be the ability to make you see what you wanted to see. It's very hard to fight against something that you love. And Star Trek did, I think, their first airable episode in the first season, first episode was called The Man Trap. And it was a giant creature that sucked all the salt out of you and killed you dead. But the reason no one could defeat it was it would always appear to you in the form of what you like the most. And to Dr. McCoy, it appeared as one of his long-lost loves, the love of his life. And you can't shoot or strangle the love of your life. At least that was the theory. And so I think Barack Obama does that. I think he comes at us in sort of a glamour and presents to all Americans what they want to see. And it's worked really well for him. And I've had the feeling for the last several months now that this glamour is slowly starting to fade off. It's like a mist rising. And then certainly after Wisconsin, the mist is clearing very rapidly. We're not at the point where the wheels have come off yet or are about to come off, but you can see it from where we're standing. There is a tipping point with this guy, and the tipping point, I think, is a combination of two different things. First of all, external tipping point will come if it comes. If it comes, it will come when the press begins to realize that Barack Obama either isn't going to win or is likely not to win. There's a serious, serious chance he won't win. And I think then the press, sort of as one mass, will come to, not in a coordinated way, not like phone calls will be made. I just think they're going to realize they've blown their entire credibility getting this guy over the line. They've spent the last 3.5, feels like 5.5 years giving him tongue baths every day. And I think the point will come when they realize if he's not going to be president in 3 or 4 months, they're going to be out of luck. What are they going to do? And I think if it reaches the point where it looks like he's not going to be elected, or even that there's a good chance he won't be elected, then I think the press may actually turn on him. You start to see signs already. The press is starting to ask real questions now, tough questions. I say this many times because I don't want to be misunderstood. I thought that the press was very hard on George Bush, unfairly hard on him, but it is the job of the press to relentlessly attack the president. That's what the press is supposed to do. Attack the president. Not necessarily attack him, but constantly be looking to uncover things. So even if they were overly hard on George Bush, they were doing what they're supposed to do. The press is the immune system of the body politic in a republic. They are supposed to, somebody just said, attack watch. Attack watch. Well, that's a different issue. But the press is supposed to root out disease and corruption in the body of the republic. Now, if you have a too aggressive immune system in a body, you have immunoresponse. You have an allergy. An allergy is just when your immune system attacks your own tissue. It thinks there's something there that's not there, and so it attacks it, and you basically has your body overly attacking itself. It's what an allergy reaction is. And allergies are annoying, and in rare cases they can be fatal. But when your immune system doesn't function, when the press does not go after corruption because they agree with the president philosophically and politically, and they like him and they contribute to him, when the entire liberal press machine not only doesn't report the facts on Barack Obama, but actually is in the news suppression business, they start covering up facts. That's not a story. Then you have the other kind of immune problem. You have an immunodeficiency disease. And frankly, my friends, right now, America's got a pretty advanced case of AIDS. We don't have a functioning immune system the way that we should. We don't have people pointing out things like Fast and Furious. I'll get to that later on tonight. And Obama's background. No one seems interested in the fact that, putting aside all the speculative stuff that's out there that's got a fair amount of credibility, no one's interested in the fact that the proven things aren't even interesting to them. Proven fact that he started his career in the living room of convicted terrorist Bill Ayers. No one disputes this. It's not a story. No one disputes the fact that his academic records are sealed, that his travel records are sealed, that his medical records are sealed. If that had been George Bush, we never would have heard the end of it. If it had been George Bush saying to the Russian premier, listen, just guys lay low for another 5-6 months. Once I get past my election, I can be a lot more flexible in giving you things like the missile defense shield. If that had been George Bush, they would have called it treason. And you know what? They would have been right to call it treason. So if it reaches a point where the press realizes that they may be out of business in a sense, that their guy's going to go down no matter how hard they pull, then the press may actually start to turn on him and start covering some of these stories. And if they do, then the wheels will come off. It'll be like watching a football game where all of a sudden you're up 6, or sometimes in my case you're down 6, and then 7 minutes later you're down 28, and another minute after that you're down 35. You're just, the wheels come off. Yeah, and you're right, Monster, on the comment section, in the little comment section. Of course, the only reason I say that is because I'm a racist. So that's the one way it could happen externally. The other way I think we're going to whip them out of their boots is Barack Obama's never been challenged his entire life. This is a guy who's had a headwind. Never. He's always had a wind behind him. A little phrase I liked a lot that I just kind of came up with. He's a guy who's had doors open for him as he crosses the street, heading towards the doors. And wait till he gets in front of the door. The door's open all the way down the street for him. So he's never had a tough fight. And I don't think he likes a tough fight. I don't think he knows what to do. Certainly, all of these little shiny objects that they held up for us, Romney put a dog on his roof of his car. Well, Obama put a dog on the roof of his mouth. The Republican war on women. Well, there's what's her name, whose name, Hillary Rosen, who says Ann Romney never worked a day in her life. She's a stay-at-home mom. Every time they try to do something to get people off the economy, it blows up in their faces. And you can tell that these people don't know how to deal with things blowing up in their faces. I just have a little bit of residual volume up there, don't I? How do I turn that off? Like that. That's how I turn it off. And that may have taken care of an echo. Sorry about that, guys. Like I said, it'd be nice to have an engineer. So if Obama gets to the point where he realizes that he's in a real fight, I don't think he knows how to handle it. It's easy to look good in a debate against John McCain, because anybody would look good in a debate against John McCain. But if you've ever seen Barack Obama off a teleprompter, it's a lot of ums. Mitt Romney, who I've been very hard on, and I think rightfully so. Conservatives have a good reason to be hard on Mitt Romney. He's a very liberal Republican. But Mitt Romney has been, I thought, superb in the debates. He's been, you know what, here's the word, folks. What Mitt Romney has been, put aside what you think about him as a candidate, and put aside what your genuine conservative concerns are for him as a president. He ran a very good primary campaign, and the proof of this is he's the nominee. And the second thing that Mitt Romney did is, when Mitt Romney speaks, Mitt Romney looks and sounds like the president. Now, Barack Obama looks cool and hip and to some degree presidential, standing next to John McCain, the oldest candidate ever run in the history of the Republic, by the way. But standing next to Mitt Romney, he's not going to look that good. And Mitt Romney is a guy who's had a business background for almost all of his life. He knows how to debate. He knows how to negotiate and give and take. I think Mitt Romney's going to destroy him in the debates. And the debates are interesting because the debates are the only thing, if you think about it, it's really astonishing and kind of sad, but the 3 head-to-head debates are the only time where the press can't get in there and tell you what to think. For those 90 minutes, it's just the two people and the American public with no filter. No one's saying, well, what the president really means is this and that. No, they'll do that immediately after and try to spin it for the Democrat, as they always do. But during the debates, the American people get to watch him. I think he's going to destroy him. And I don't mean destroy him by dismantling his points, although I think he'll do that too. I think he'll destroy him in terms of his character, in terms of his calmness and his ability to finish, sentences and not say things like 57 states in the Austrian language and Army corpsmen or Navy corpsmen or transcontinental railroads and all this other stuff that Obama does. I think Mitt's going to eat him alive. I think Mitt's going to look like the president. Obama looked like the president standing next to McCain. Romney's going to look like the president standing next to Obama. And I think that there's a large degree of the Willie Brown effect in the polls that we're seeing right now. People underreporting their support for Romney because nobody wants to tell, well, not nobody, but let's say 5% of the people who are polled don't want to tell a complete stranger that they're voting against the black guy. I wasn't this race aware or this race oriented before Barack Obama was elected, but since he's made everything about race and since the Democrats make their entire reason for being, the only reason that Democrats are in national elections is because of the way they play privileged groups, minority groups, and that sort of thing. We have to talk about it. It's just part of the landscape now. I'd like it to be not that case, but nevertheless, there it is. Yeah, he's never been challenged. He's going to be challenged. He's already being challenged, and the wheels are coming off. They don't know what to do. So yes, Jet, I think we're going to whip them out of their boots. And if I was Barack Obama right now, if I was not up nationwide by anywhere from 12 to 15 points at this point in the campaign, I'd be worried. To be tied with Romney or to have Romney be up 1 or 2 nationally, to have Romney be up, to have Scott Brown win in Wisconsin. It's not like Scott Brown won in Utah or Texas. I mean, to win 7 points in Wisconsin, and the way Barack Obama was such a coward about how he handled that. And he is a coward, by the way. He's a moral coward. I said this, I think, last week on the Stratosphere Lounge. It's one of the few things I think that bears saying again. When it became obvious that Walker was going to win that election, Barack Obama decided he wanted nothing to do with it, and so did the big Democratic National Committee. What Barack Obama should have done is he should have done what Phil Sheridan did. Barack Obama should have been there in Wisconsin knowing he was going to lose, and he should have lost. He should have been there to lose. He should have lost at the head of his troops, because that's what leaders do. Leaders don't stand in front of the victory parade when you win, and then when things get bad, as I said last week, it's like that episode of Band of Brothers when they're in the Argonne during the Battle of the Bulge, and they had that horrible captain, and every time the artillery started coming down, he said, "You hold the line, Sergeant, I'm going to go report back to battalion." That's not leadership. He's a coward. He ran away. And the left sees this, by the way. Just so you guys know how this works, I just occasionally glance over at the comment stream, so it's not like I get to see them all. But Dave just said he is a coward. How can people not see that? I think even the left is starting to see that. Even the left is starting to see it. They are disappointed. Disappointed is not the word. The Netroots left-wing convention was last week. The Right Online is next week. I think it's Right Online. I'm going anyway. It's in Vegas. So, yeah, they're demoralized and they're disorganized and they're leaderless and they're disappointed. And that's when you have to keep the pressure up. You never let them recover, ever. You push them into the river. Push them into the river until you get every single one of them. Let every single one of them surrender. I don't want to hurt anybody. I've never wanted to hurt anybody. One of the things that Ronald Reagan was so good at, and one of the things that the left has accomplished, although not politically, they've accomplished it they're terrible at it politically, but they are masterful at it culturally, is that the left doesn't beat us by overwhelming us. They beat us by converting us. And it's a hard sell. I mean, in order to convert people away from conservative values, you have to convince them things like that they're bad people and that their government is bad and that all the freedom and prosperity they enjoy is bad and that all of the American wealth and power is bad. You have to be doing that 24/7 to do it. But if you do it 24/7 over 40 years, you can convince people to do that. So they've turned entire generations of us into leftists because of the cultural influences. So they don't overwhelm us or beat us down. They convert us. Now, I want to come back to this later on because it's a great point. I'm going to Randy McVeigh asked a question about that. I'll save that to near last. But yes, the short form is, Jed, I think we're going to whip them out of their boots. Let's move on, shall we? Want to have a small sip of water. Joseph Kunstler wants to know who I thought Romney's VP should be. This will be very brief. I think he's got it narrowed down to pretty much two choices. What do I know? I mean, he could just completely pick somebody out of the grab bag. A couple of speculatory things. Some people had speculated on it being Chris Christie. I think Chris Christie's a terrible choice. Romney is not very conservative, and the last thing you want to do as a running mate to take the fire out of your base, which is starting to show up now that he's fighting back, is to pick the only other governor in the Republic with an R who's actually less conservative than him. And Chris Christie, I don't think, is electable to national office. I love Chris Christie's attitudes towards the unions and towards the schools, which are the unions, but I don't think he's the guy. Somebody once said Condoleezza Rice would be interesting, and I think Condoleezza Rice would be an extraordinarily good president. I can't imagine anybody be better president than her in terms of her knowledge or foreign policy. She's just smart, tough, aggressively brilliant, America-loving patriot. But I think the problem with Rice are twofold. First of all, it looks like you're pandering to black people, like, hey, they got a black person, we got a black person too. And secondly, she has the Bush administration smell on her, and I think that the Democrats would like nothing better than to run against George Bush again, and I don't think Romney's stupid enough to give him that. So I think it's going to come down to probably two guys. What do I know? This is the kind of thing I'm not exceptionally good at, is this kind of in-the-trenches politics. But if I had to pick two, I would say, number one, I like Paul Ryan, because I've heard Paul Ryan speak personally, and Paul Ryan is amazingly smart. I think we had an election on cool in 2008, and I think everybody sees how badly that's turned out. I think 2012 is going to be about competence. At least it should be framed that way. It should be framed about competence. And Romney is a competent businessman. He seems a competent guy. If you look at Romney's history of going in and finding out what's wrong with a company and cutting the bad and keeping the good, he's probably exactly the guy we need. But the reason I think that Paul Ryan would be an interesting choice is that Paul Ryan would bring you a lot of conservative support. I mean, solid conservative support. And I think you would also be able to make the case to the country and to independents who are not happy with this economic situation, not happy with the deficits. I think if you picked Paul Ryan, I don't know how he plays strategically in terms of, you need a guy who gets you a state and stuff. I'm not smart enough to know about how that works. But Ryan would say to the conservative base and to the rest of the country, and to history too, by the way, that we have a choice in front of us now and we're almost out of time. We can take Europe's path and vote ourselves more entitlements until the economy collapses, which, according to the Congressional Budget Office, will happen in 2027. At the latest, it'll be sooner than that. It would be a way to say to the American people, picking Paul Ryan is a way to say, we are going to make the deficit and the out-of-control spending and entitlement reform our number one priority. I'm going to pull Paul Ryan out of his position in the House where he is exceedingly useful. I'm going to make him the vice president, and he's not going to have any job other than breaking Senate ties, occasionally going to funerals of dead leaders who are trivial, and mostly working on the Ryan budget and getting it enacted every day. Every day, working on the details of getting this budget enacted, and then we'll take this budget out and we'll keep shopping it around, and hopefully we'll have a Republican House and a Republican Senate. Ryan would be a very good choice in that regard. And the other choice, obviously, everyone's talking about is Rubio. I've seen Rubio speak in a small crowd, too. Rubio gets America. Rubio, I don't remember the exact numbers, but when Rubio was running for the Florida Senate, or even before then, he might have been running for councilman or something. He put together a list. I don't remember the number, but it was something like 130 things that we could do to improve government, and he sent it to Tallahassee. And they implemented all of them. All of them. Every single one of the 130 that Rubio suggested were so good that both Republicans and Democrats implemented every one of them. Rubio understands government. He understands the role of government. That's an issue we'll talk about in a little bit, too. It's another great question. But Rubio gets it. And Rubio, much more importantly than all this, Rubio understands America, and he understands socialism because his family ran away from socialism. I want a guy who understands what this primary threat to the country is. The primary threat to the country is not Iran. It's not an external threat. It's not even Russia. It's none of that stuff. The threat to the country is this taking America down the road of socialism that Europe is down. And it's failing before our eyes. And these idiots in the Democratic Party just keep saying, faster, 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 forward, over the cliff. Rubio could make that case better than anybody because politics is the art of connecting to people. Policy is the art of coming up with solutions, but politics is taking policy and selling it. You have to be able to sell this stuff. Ronald Reagan was the president he was, not because he got bogged down in a lot of little details. He wasn't a wonk like Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton understood policy and government probably better than any president in history. But Ronald Reagan understood the values of America, understood the myth And I don't mean that in the sense of a falsehood. I mean that in the sense of a story that is beyond true. It's internally true. It feels true because it is true. Rubio gets that. And I think Romney probably gets it too. I think we're going to have a very clear choice to make in 2012. So I'm personally rooting for Ryan, but I'd be more than happy with Rubio. They're both young, handsome, attractive, competent. The intelligence and the capability just oozes out of these guys. That's exactly what we need to counter this goat rodeo, this clown car that we've had in Washington for 3.5 years now. So, yeah, and I saw somebody over there said Sarah Palin for Energy Secretary. You're darn right. I'd have Sarah Palin in as Secretary of either Energy or the Interior. If she was Energy Secretary, I'd say, Governor Palin, we're going to give you 3 years to figure out how to shut your department down. And I think she would do it gleefully. Then I'd move her over to education and give her a couple years to shut that program down, too. We'll talk about education a little later on, too. I got to move. 6:20 already. Time flies when you're having fun. So Rubio or Paul Ryan for me. I don't know who he's going to pick. I hope it's one of those two. Keith Alleman wants to know if Eric Holder is going to get the boot. I've said this on the show before, and I've said it publicly. I don't believe there's ever been a worse person holding high office in America than Eric Holder. I don't think there's ever been. Period. I don't think Edwin Stanton was a worse person than Eric Holder. I'm not going to spend too much time on this topic, honestly, Keith, not because it's a good question, because it's too good a question. I could do an hour on Eric Holder. But when Eric Holder says we're not going to prosecute these thugs in the Black Panther Party because I won't prosecute my people, meaning black people, you know you have a person that does not see America as a group of citizens. He sees it as a group of privileged, grievance groups, of which he's a member. And that's why I think we will never see Eric Holder resign or fired. I may be wrong about that. If the pressure gets too high, Obama will throw him under the bus like he throws everybody. Everybody goes under the bus. Don't you worry. Everybody goes under that bus. But for Obama to fire Eric Holder, he's firing himself in a way, because Eric Holder, Barack Obama is, folks, this is not a mystery, the liberal icon. Oh my gosh, I've forgotten her name. How could I forget her name? Her face right in front of me. Geraldine Ferraro, the vice presidential nominee in 1984, I guess it was, 88, sorry, who was the first woman on a national ticket. The liberals loved her until she came out and said, if Barack Obama was white, he wouldn't even be in the race. He hasn't done anything. And of course, that meant that she had to be exiled, this icon of the Democratic Party in her entire life to Democratic politics, utterly ostracized, under the bus, thump, 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 goodbye, gone. She died shortly thereafter. But he is the affirmative action president, and Eric Holder's the affirmative action attorney general. And if Barack Obama gets rid of Eric Holder, he's kind of cutting his own cord, isn't he? He's kind of unmooring his own boat if he does that. So I don't think that's going to happen. I do think he deserves to be impeached or whatever happens to Eric Holder or recalled. I don't know if there's enough time left to get this, but I'd like to see it happen before he goes. I think he'll probably drag himself by the fingernails right to the loss in November, and that'll be the end of that. Benjamin Zadowski, sorry if I get your names wrong, has got such a good question. I'm going to hold on to that because I want to kind of get there a little later. I just want to circle it so I make sure I don't forget it. He wants to talk about the Frankfurt School. I want to talk about the Frankfurt School too. But let me get a couple of the other little ones out of the way, littler ones. They're all interesting, or I wouldn't have picked them. J.L. Dupree has a question about choices. I think he's probably obviously teeing off on the New York ban on 16-ounce drinks and the fact that you can't buy big gulps in New York. Needless to say, I find the entire thing appalling. The idea that Bloomberg has an R after his name is like David Brooks having an R after his name. It makes him interesting to the liberals. It's the same nonsense that justifies the existence of what's her name, McCain. I've forgotten her name because I never pay her much attention. McCain's daughter. The people are interested in McCain's daughter because she's the daughter of McCain. No one gives a damn about what she has to say, but if she says something bad about conservatives or Republicans, and she's McCain's daughter, or somebody's got something bad to say about Republicans, and it's Ronald Reagan's son, then suddenly people trot it out like it's got some kind of actual merit, when in fact these people can't think their way out of paper bags. They're just idiots. Zawadzki. Sorry about that, Mr. Zawadzki. So Bloomberg, Meghan McCain, thank you, Tuning Sport. So first of all, Bloomberg has an R after his name, but anybody who would implement something like this is not only not a conservative, I don't even think you get to call yourself a Republican anymore. Thanks, everybody, with the Megans. It's great having a little feedback here. Because this whole idea of what Bloomberg is proposing goes against everything we believe as conservatives. It is as fundamental assault on conservatism as anything you can come up with. It is the essential part of what we hate about big state progressivism. It is the state deciding what is better for you than you are. You don't know what's good for you, so we're going to force you to do something in your own interest, of course, for your own good. We're going to force you to do something because you can't be trusted to do the right thing. It's not just anti-Americans, not just anti-conservative. It's anti-democracy. It's anti-republic. It is against everything. Thank you. It's fascist. Yes, it is fascism. To tell people, people get the liberals they just have a cow when you say that's fascism. It is, though. It is. When you say to somebody that you cannot legally sell a product in a quantity that is legally available, no one's arguing about whether or not Coke should be banned. Not yet. But as my friend James Lilacs wrote in his tremendous response to this, you mark my words, if this ban doesn't reduce obesity, then what New York will eventually do if these people go unchecked is then they will ban soft drinks. Why? Because as James Lilacs said, he said, we tried, but you just wouldn't listen, would you, you stupid people? This assumes that Mike Bloomberg knows what's better for you than you do. And frankly, there's a bigger issue too, which I'll get to in a minute. But Lilac said it offends the vanity of liberals to see fat people walking around. I think there's a lot of emotional truth to that. If you've ever been to New York, you know the kind of people that are in these skyscrapers, not the best people in the world. But it is the essence of progressivism to use your welfare as an excuse to take away your rights and your freedoms. In fact, that's a pretty pithy little argument because that's what it comes down to. Progressives use your welfare as a lever to take away your freedom, and people buy it. Some people buy it. Listen, if you work hard for a living and you're a sanitation engineer and all you do is pick up garbage bags all day and you are 50 pounds overweight and you get off of that truck after working 15 hours or 10 hours, you're a cab driver, whatever, and you want to go upstairs and get a 10-ounce hamburger and a 30-ounce soft drink, that's your business. And if you have health benefits as a result of that, health complications as a result of that, that's also your business. But now we get to the much, much larger point. The next firewall, which I think will probably release on Thursday, is about Obamacare. It's not about the practicals of Obamacare. It's about the theory of Obamacare. And what you can do with this argument is this, and this is crystal clear. This is why we hate Obamacare and why we hate this kind of thing in general. And government health care in particular, especially single payer. Here's the argument, and it's very simple, and everybody understands it. I don't think anybody can disagree with it. If you weigh 600 pounds and you smoke 5 packs of cigarettes a day and you want to ride a moped at 70 miles an hour, well, mopeds won't do that, but a little motorcycle would, without a helmet, and you're paying for your own health insurance, then I don't care what you do. I don't care. We used to call this being in a free country. I don't care what you do. You want to be a skateboarder and do these absurd stunts as long as you're not running into somebody else. If you fall down and break your face, if you're paying for your own health insurance, then I don't care. But when we get into government-sponsored health care where taxpayers are paying for everybody, then I do care. Because then your behavior is being subsidized by me. I'm paying for your health care in the form of taxation. So now all of a sudden I have a vested interest in keeping those costs low. And so all of a sudden I start getting real interested in your business. I'm calling this firewall, why don't you mind my own business? And that's exactly what it is. Now everybody's looking at everybody else. Oh, you can't have that. That leads to heart attacks, and heart attacks means that that puts more strain on the resources of the state, and we don't have that kind of resources, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. This is how you become a tyranny, because you get the kind of society that the Soviet Union and China were so well known for. They're tyrannies. because everybody is in this together. Everybody's in it together. There's a limited pool of resources. And if you're taking resources out more than you should, more than your fair share, then we can't have that. So this is an argument that I would break out. I'm going to be speaking at Oberlin College in the fall, big liberal college, and I'm going to break this right out. And I'm going to say, how many of you think you should be able to go out and go skateboarding or do tricks on bikes? And they'll all raise their hands. And I'll say, no, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that because of your own liberal philosophy. It'll be a conservative group, but, I'll ask the liberals. You don't get to go and do your skateboarding tricks anymore. You know why? Because it injures you. It injures you way out of average for what you'd be injured if you weren't doing it. So we're going to ban it for your own good, of course, because we don't want to see you get hurt. But really, it's because we don't want to pay for the extra medical care. So you can't do that anymore. Can't use your skateboard anymore. Can't ride those bikes anymore. You can't ride a bike without a helmet and elbow and knee pads in specially marked, grass-sided, rubber-bounded bike trails, which we will construct at great expense. And when you start to realize, when you start to make people realize that their freedoms are going to be restricted by this, then some of them will wake up, not all of them. They have to get older first. But this is it, right? And there was a report, which I'm going to cite in this firewall, that came out in this year. This wasn't Nazi Germany. This came out this year, and it came out in Australia, that bastion of fascism. Australia is a sweet, lovely place. Everybody loves Australia. I've been there. It's a great, lovely, laid-back country. But a couple of Australian sociologists made the argument, are you ready for this? That you should be legally able to abort children up to 2 or maybe a year or two after they are born. In the cases of disability where the child is putting unusual resources on the parent, maybe more psychological strain than they can bear, or if your economic hardship is, I'm not making this up, folks, I know you think I am, but if your economic situation is very dire, you should be able to kill a child that's maybe a year old because according to them, they're not fully children. You see, they're not real personalities. They don't have sense of self-awareness yet. So you can go ahead and murder them legally. They're advocating this because it might put actual additional strain on the real people, the actual people, the parents, and also on the state. Now people say, well, we'll never get to that. Well, they say, well, Norway's got socialized health care for everybody, and so does Sweden, and no one's being murdered there. Yeah, well, what's happening there is they are being murdered there. They're being murdered because cradle-to-grave welfare states destroy the life force. That's why Scandinavia has a replacement rate of, I think it's like 1.3, 1.4. Every couple, every 2 people have to produce 2.1 people for the population to stay stable. You have to produce 1 kid to replace mom, 1 kid to replace dad, and 0.1 kid to replace all of those guys that are doing the skateboarding tricks who are not going to get to be old enough to reproduce. So a birth rate above 2.1 is a growing society, and one below 2.1 is a society that's getting smaller. And Greece's birth rate is 1.3, Italy's 1.35, something like that. These societies are halving in population every 40, 50 years. So what that means is you cannot say that socialized health care is anything other than a Ponzi scheme if your birth rate is declining. Now, with that said, if the progressives were to take a completely pro-growth attitude on everything, we're in favor of a rapidly growing economy, we want everybody to have 10 kids, there's all the room in the world, there's all the energy we possibly need, as long as that population continued to grow, you could, in fact, have this socialized health care because it would be paid for by larger numbers of people coming in from the bottom and paying benefits to a smaller number of people at the top. It is a Ponzi scheme, but even a Ponzi scheme will continue to pay out real money to everybody involved as long as ever-increasing numbers of new people come in at the bottom. Ponzi schemes are a great way to get rich as long as that happens, but it doesn't happen. Sooner or later, it's going to stop growing. Then it goes vertical, and then it becomes inverted. And when it becomes inverted, what's happening in Sweden and Greece and all these other things with this nationalized cradle-to-grave benefits is, in order to keep the machine turning, they have to do one of 2 things. They have to bring in immigrants, which means they are artificially bringing in people to keep the base of that pyramid wide, and the people they're bringing in are non-Europeans, they're certainly non-Scandinavians. Many of them have not the first generations that came over, they love Sweden, let's say, but the second generation been given nothing but handouts their whole lives. They don't become Swedes, not like in America. It's the only country in the world where you can become an American by raising your hand, because that's our national identity. We are a nation that is founded on choosing to become an American. No one's more or less American than anybody else that raises their hand and swears the oath of citizenship. And most Americans would agree that new citizens, new legal immigrants are the best Americans there are. So That doesn't happen in Sweden. So these people are resentful and bitter, and they're pulling more benefits. It's all collapsing in front of our eyes. It's all collapsing in front of our eyes. Anyway, that's where you go from the 16-ounce thing, right? Bloomberg says no big drinks because it's a drain on our healthcare resources. And that will turn into death panels sooner or later. You mark my words. It's already happened in the kind of countries that people, when people hold up what their model for socialized single-payer healthcare is, they always say the National Health Service in Britain. And every week there is a story about a guy who's 78 years old or something, who's been denied hip replacement surgery because there's no money to pay for it. There's no resources. Have some painkillers for the next 5 or 6 or 8 years or whatever the case may be. Happens all the time. Happens every day. You're too old. We can't. It doesn't make sense for us to produce resources for you since resources are tight. You see, that's what the government does. You are a case study. You're a cog. And people are legitimately saying we're out of resources, nothing we can do. Okay? If you're paying for your own health insurance, you're not a cog anymore. You're the center of the universe. It's your life. You've been paying your money into the system, and by God, I'm 78 years old, and I expect to walk for the next 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 years, and I want a new hip, please. All right, sir. Thank you. Thank you for your lifetime of payments. Boom. It's a fundamental way of looking at people. When you're paying for your own health care, you're sharing risk with other people who are paying for their own health care. Insurance companies know what these actuarial tables do. Everybody's making a little money. They're not making huge money, certainly not making the kind of money that Apple's making, like the computer I'm talking into right now. But nevertheless, it's a growth and it's a sustainable system. And by the way, before Obamacare came along, 93% of all Americans had the best health care in the world. So by all means, let's fundamentally destroy that system and replace it with Canadians coming here, as Jane Sinclair just wrote. You're in Canada, you have free health care, by the way, which is the only thing. If you talk about Canadians who have an attitude about America, they'll say, well, we have free health care. That's the Canadian identity. We have free health care. You have prepaid health care. Let me just make this other point going off the 16-ounce thing. You don't have free health care, ma'am. When I got out, we're not going to get to all these questions tonight. When I got out to Los Angeles, I got my first job as a limo driver, and it was an awesome job because I didn't do a bunch of kids in stretch limos. I worked in a limo company for 3.5 years, and I only did 5 or 6 stretch runs during that entire time. Almost everything I did was drive executives from San Marino, Pasadena area to the airport and back in Lincoln Town cars. And many times people don't want to talk, but sometimes they do. And if they get a driver who can carry a conversation, you get to hear the most amazing things because you're dealing with the top people in the world. And so I talked to AIDS researchers, I talked to the president of American Airlines, learned a lot from those guys. And somewhere in here, I got a guy who was a president of a company from Norway, and I was taking him back to the airport, and he struck up a conversation with me. And his attitude was not offensive, at least he didn't intend it to be. But his attitude basically was, Bill, you seem rather intelligent for this nation of low-sloping forehead knuckle-draggers. Let me ask you a question. Why is it that you people have such a hard time since 1988, 89? Why do you oppose free health care so much? He said, I have free health care. I'm a Norwegian. If I broke my leg getting out of this limousine, I would be helicoptered to a hospital where I'd be taken care of, and then they'd fly me back to Norway, and I'd get home care, and if I had to be out of work for a year, I'd get 100% of my salary, and they get 80% of my salary for the next 5 years, and I'd get benefits 70% of my salary until I die. Who could be opposed to the idea of free health care? And I was, 30 years old, something like that, 31, and I had never given this a moment's thought before this, but I said to him, sir, excuse me, do you mind telling me what your tax rate is? He says about 72%. I said, well, sir, you don't get free health care. You have prepaid health care. Every single paycheck you make, they are paying for your health care. That helicopter ride is deducted from every single check you make, whether you need it or not. And they're taking a lot more than you would be taking if you were paying just for that. It's prepaid health care. You are not able to go on vacations or buy things or do expansions to your house because of your horrendous tax burden. So please don't call it free because it's a commodity. No one's working for free. Those doctors don't work for free. The hospital electricity is not free. It's prepaid. You pay for it every week. And I have to say, he was a little stunned by that. But that's how things are here in the knuckle-dragging, low-sloping, forehead republic of the free and the land of the brave. So sometimes people get a little education. Anyway, 16-ounce drinks. Some people may be for 'em. Me, I'm again 'em. Let's see. Education. Let's talk about education. I live in California, which is the most beautiful place on the earth, with the climate that makes you think somebody designed it. In Santa Monica area, I live just outside of Santa Monica. As a kid who grew up in Florida, where at 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, that sun is up there and the 100-degree temperature and 100% humidity, and you just want to die. You do 4 showers a day when you live in South Florida. As a kid who grew up in that kind of heat, once I came to California, I said, I'm never leaving here. That's why I have a rifle and a handgun. The climate is perfect. The scenery is breathtaking. We have an airplane. I share an airplane with somebody who I think is watching the show right now. And we'll fly down the coast at 500-600 feet above the water, and it simply is not possible to describe to you how beautiful this place is. But it is filled with some of the dumbest people on the planet. And the unions, the teacher unions out here, are appalling. I've talked to teachers who tell me anecdotal stories of what happens in classrooms in California, and I simply can't. I literally can't believe them. Many of them run like this. People are disrupting the class. And when I say disrupting the class, I don't mean like giggling under their breath. They are just openly turned around in their chairs talking to each other, and they're playing, video games on their cell phones, and they're throwing erasers, and the teacher's standing in the front of the room with class, shut up. They don't care. They don't care because they can't do anything to them. Sometimes they'll go to a timeout where they'll sit with a counselor, and the counselor will say, don't you realize that you're disrupting the class? Yeah, it's an utter mystery. Anyway, so it's education in this beautiful, horrible state. It's one of the worst, and I think we're 47th now and on our way down, because we spend more and more money and we get worse and worse results. But the teachers will say, when I try to correct a disruptive class, I'll try to reason with them. There's your first mistake, ma'am. You don't reason with these kind of savages. They need some boundaries. But what you'll say to them is, if you don't pay attention, you're not going to learn how to read. And if you don't know how to read, then you'll never get a job. And they'll say with a straight face and without a moment's hesitation, not in a wry way, not in a clever way, what? They will say, what do I need a job for? I don't need a job. What do you mean you don't need a job? I'm on welfare. My mom's on welfare. My grandmom's on welfare. We're 4th generation welfare. What do I need a job for? What do I need to be able to do any of this stuff for? I'll just continue to get checks and go do what I want. When you get to that place, you're not done, because I never believe we're done, but you're ready for some. You're at bottom. You've hit bottom. And now we come to what happens whenever you have a situation. When you look at the educational system in America and how utterly, 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 utterly dysfunctional it is, how it is it's simply just a breeding ground. It's an indoctrination camp. They don't learn physics or math or anything. We did a trifecta. I loved it. It was one of my favorite trifectas ever, where I took a look at Japanese students who were able to use abaci, and they were able to multiply 6-figure numbers virtually as fast as you could. They would literally move their fingers like this, and they're multiplying 6-figure numbers by other 6-figure numbers. They're doing long division out to 9 digits with this thing. And what was remarkable about these Japanese kids were they got so used to it that after a while they could take away the abacus. That was fascinating to me. They'd take the abacus away, and you'd see them looking down with they had their pencils, and with their fingers, their fingers are doing this. They're just working a mental abacus in their head. They have the position of all the beads stored, and they're just doing it in their heads, and it's 12-figure math, and it's perfect. That's real education. That's the way we used to teach education in America, not necessarily with the abacus, but with an emphasis on standards, an emphasis on competence, an emphasis on being able to execute core skill sets. Then here in California, I brought in as a contrast, there's an ad in California for it says some kind of a program called 1,000 Ways to Teach. A Million Ways to Teach. Who am I kidding? I'm selling those people short. It's A Million Ways to Teach. You see this surly kid sitting in a classroom, kind of this not a bright looking kid, and you see a teacher up in the front of the class, and he's real loose and kind of cool, and he builds a kite, and then you see the students making a kite, and then they take the kite down the hallway. If you live in California, you see this thing, and they walk down the hallway, and they go out in the backyards, and they fly the kite, and then the graphics on the screen say, you can make math dance. You can make physics sing. Teach physics by showing a kid how to fly a kite. And I'm saying the kite flies because of physics. Kite flies because of physics. Why is a kite staying there? It's because of physics. These kids don't need more innovation. They need less innovation. They don't need to get out of rote learning. They need to get into rote learning. They need to have somebody sit down with a chalkboard and explain it. I could explain why a kite flies. It'd take me probably 10 minutes. I can explain the basics of Bernoulli's principle of airflow over the top of the bottom. These are fundamental things that are not too difficult to explain. I would talk about how, when I do ground school occasionally, I'll talk about how a vacuum cleaner, you put a low pressure area over the wing. Imagine you went to the most powerful vacuums you get at a car wash, and you stuck 50,000 of them on the top of an airplane wing, you lift the airplane by it. It's suction, basically. But I'd have to do that on a blackboard, and that would mean I'd need 10 or 15 minutes of their concentration. They can't concentrate for 10 or 15 minutes. So I don't suppose I have to tell any of you, certainly the least of which not either John Zeno or Aaron Walker, who both had education dilemma questions. I don't have to tell you how bad things are. So now we get into a situation. What happens when we are in a situation of absolute horrendous meltdown nightmares? What do? Well, we do the same thing we do when we have that kind of overload in the battlefield. We have to use triage. We have to triage America's education system. It's that critical. It's that far gone. What I mean by that is there are some public schools, I'm talking about public schools now. Private schools have to be better, because if they're not better, then no one pays them and they go out of business. So we'll just take for read, even though I'm sure there are some exceptions, we'll take for read the idea that either private schools or parochial schools are far better than public schools. So I'm just confining this to the public education system right now. So I think we have to look at this in terms of triage. Triage, in the traditional battlefield sense, means that as the wounded come in, and you've only got so many operating tables, you've only got so many surgeons, and you have hundreds, if not thousands, of wounded, dying men coming your way. What triage does is it puts somebody who's not a surgeon, let's say a nurse or an orderly or a medic, somebody with some medical knowledge, but not the kind of professional who's able to do brain surgery or heart surgery or save a life of a guy who's dying. And they look at the wounded as they come in one by one. And what triage does is triage divides people into three categories. There are the walking wounded. These are people who are so lightly wounded that they'll survive. We'll give them a bandage. If we have an aspirin, we'll give them an aspirin. We'll put them off to the side. We can't help them now, but that's okay because they're not in any danger of dying. They're hurting, but they're going to live. So these people go off into one group. They call it triage because it means breaking it down into threes. On the other extreme, in come people who've had their entire guts blown open, right? And they're just barely alive. And we can't save these people. We can't. We don't have the means to save them. They're going to die. So those people go to another tent and they get a lot of morphine and they get as much care as you can give them and as much company as you give them, because if you spend resources on those people, they're not going to make it. It's a waste of resources. Likewise with triage, a waste of resources to put resources on people who are going to survive whether you treat them or not. And what this does is, by taking these two extremes out of the sides, it means that you get to put the limited number of operating room tables and surgeons and apply them to the people whose lives can in fact be saved. People who would die without the care but would live if they got it. So you're peeling off the top end and the bottom end so that you can get to the middle. So if you were to apply the idea of triage to school, you would basically say that there are many public schools in America today that are actually perfectly fine or in need of minor tweaks, and those schools are okay. You do a little bit of work there, and try to basically just count your blessings, and everything's copacetic there. The middle section, which may not be the largest section, are schools that are not so far gone that they don't need help. And in cases like that, then it requires active, constant pressure from parents, and it requires the kind of grassroots political stuff that my friend from Trifecta, Scott Ott, does. You get on the school board, you affect change, you make sure that they're getting a rigid curriculum with defined standards that is teaching the basics and the fundamental, and you try to steer that school back into the realm of the usable. I think most schools in America, though, sad to say, certainly most schools in California, without question, are in that triage group where there's nothing you can do. When you have something this big, this diseased, and this far gone as so many public schools in America, you can't save them. I really believe it. I genuinely believe that you can't save them. So, what does that mean? That means that if you have your kid in the kind of school where you are paying good money to have your child be taught how to hate you and everything you believe, then you have to get them out of that school. And you have to homeschool them. And I think that without question, homeschooled children do better than kids in bad public schools. I think they do probably better than kids in just about any school, because if you are so desperate with how horrible their education is, you then have to, if you're going to pull your kid out of school, teach them yourself. You're pretty serious about your kid's education, so you'll do a pretty good job. What we need are more private schools. We need this whole thing about vouchers is so brilliant, because if you had a voucher system where you were taking, first I think the Department of Education should be abolished. If you look at the Department of Education, you have a graph of here's our money and here's our test scores. The more money we spend, the lower they go. And that started when the Department of Education basically took over. So I'd have local schools, very local schools. I'd have local schools with local controls, parents very active in it, and I'd have private schools. And I'd have people be able to put an ad in the newspaper, I remember newspapers, on the internet or on TV or on the radio, and say, listen, if you're worried about your kid's grade, you don't think they're getting education, come on down to Bill Whittle's Academy, and we will get you your kid A's, and they'll pass their SATs with a 85 percentile or your money back. Okay. Now, a lot of people can't afford to do this. It's why the homeschooling movement is so popular. So if you're in a bad school, your kids are in a bad school, if you can afford to get them into private school, I've been asked this personally because I went to private schools in Bermuda. My British schooling between the ages of 4 and 12, to whatever degree I'm able to do what I'm doing now, is due exclusively to British schools with extremely rigorous standards, uniforms. When the teacher would come in, we would all rise and we'd stand until he sat down, and then we would sit down. And when he asked us a question, we'd say, sir, yes, sir, no, sir. They treated us with an equivalent level of respect, although British schoolmasters have a level of sarcasm and cynicism and wit that is a joy to behold, actually. But just to give you an idea of what a good school could look like, this is direct from my personal experience. When I was probably 8 or 9 years old, just as an example, maybe 9 or 10, somewhere in that ballpark. And I was in first year of secondary school, which would be 7th grade here. In Bermuda, we did not have a daily schedule. We had a weekly schedule. And that meant that we would have a 5-day schedule, and after day 5, we'd go back to day 1, so that if you routinely missed Fridays, you didn't get out of order. It'd be day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So let me give you an example of what that would look like. Day 1 might consist of a double period of geography, 2 hours of geography, and then an hour of Spanish, then a morning recess. You come back for a double period of metal shop, let's say, and then lunch. And then in the afternoon, you might have biology, reading, and physical education. Then day 2, you might have double physics, and then an hour of, I don't know. I'm trying to remember what we took. We took history, geography, physics, chemistry, biology, math, physical education, reading, wood shop, metal shop, art. I think it was 11. That sounds right. And we took all of these at the same time. And we took them, starting at age 7, 8, 9. And you'd have 2-hour blocks for lab work and stuff. It's amazing, actually, what you can get kids to learn if you start thinking about taking it seriously. And we didn't have anything about green economies or how to put condoms on bananas or, none of that. We just went to school and we wore uniforms. And at the time, it was all boys school and all girls school. Since then it's been integrated, which might be for the better. I'm not sure about that. I know for a fact that they've lessened their discipline standards. We would be caned. Now, the funny thing about having a headmaster who would cane you if you did something wrong, or assistant headmaster is never the headmaster, was that he never caned anybody. He just made you believe that he would. Isn't that funny how that works? Hey, I'll spend a quick moment and get off the soapbox and just tell you a quick little story about my educational background. When I was in this school, Saltus Grammar School in Bermuda, by the way, I was first in my class only because it was very competitive and I liked to compete. And it was the one thing you can see. By the way, you can see a lot of what the school would look like if you're a fan of Harry Potter. One of the things that they would do in that school, by the way, just a quick little aside, which is brilliant, is they would take the entire school and just randomly, divide the school into 4 houses. Houses used to be, in the old days in England, a house used to be a dormitory, but now it's just an arbitrary division. So you'd come in and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I think my house was Saltus house at Saltus School, and we would have a red enamel shield that we'd wear on our blazer. We had a school tie, blazer, school crest, pants, so on. But those of us who were in Saltus would have red, and then I think it was Morgan had yellow, and Patterson I think had blue, and somebody had green. So red, green, yellow, blue. And that meant that you could be constantly competing against each other. So 4 times a year they'd have an assembly, and they'd say the top scores in Saltus, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, top scores in Morgan, blah, blah, blah. And when you went down to play football or something, or soccer, that's what I meant when I said football in that case, you would, Saltus would play Morgan and Patterson would play Rhodes or whatever. That was great. But just to tell you this one little quick story. So we're in art class one day, and we had a teacher who was probably 6'4", real curly hair, looked like that one Doctor Who guy. And we called him Big Bird. And we were in art class one day, and Big Bird said, "I'm going to be back in a minute. Behave yourselves." And usually that was a cue to behave yourself. So the kids started talking, and then we were doing clay. We were playing with clay. And somebody threw a little piece of clay, and then somebody else threw some more clay. Then everybody started throwing clay. And then there was this clay fight in the art class, and Big Bird entered the classroom, and a piece of clay hit him in the face. This is absolutely true. As I tell you, I know it sounds embellished, but I'm telling you, this is how it happened. So, unlike American schools, the class, he just looked around. He like, the clay hit the ground. And he looked around and wiped this little bit of wet clay off his face. Looked around for a moment, and then he didn't say a word. And then he just nodded and closed the door and left. And I'll tell you what. I don't think I've ever been that scared in my life. So these people are masters of psychology. So they let us sit and stew for no kidding now for about 25 minutes, and we are silent as a tomb in there. What do you think is going to happen now? Just shut up! Don't say anything! Just shut up! So after 25 minutes, he comes back in and he says, "I'd like this entire form." That's what they call the class. "I want the entire form 2D to get out of your seats, leave everything where it is, leave your books where they are, and follow me upstairs to the assistant headmaster's office." Okay. The assistant headmaster looked like a bulldog. He was a short guy, and they all wore the gowns the headmasters did, like the graduation robes and stuff. We sat outside the assistant headmaster's office. We sat outside on the open air walkway outside of his door, and he parked us there for 90 minutes. 90 minutes. Bells are ringing, classes are moving. No. Nobody's going in, nothing. And what they're doing, I'm sure, looking back on it, is they're in there just drinking sherry and laughing their asses off. But man, for all of us out there, we knew they were checking the books. They were checking the school codes and legal codes to see whether or not they could cane us to death or not. Would they have to stop before they killed us, and would they be liable if they did? That was what we were talking about. Seriously, that's what we really thought was happening. We thought, we are going to get it. And here's the genius of what was going on there. What those guys did was, when they made us sit outside that office for 90 minutes, they really made sure that we punished ourselves. They got our level of apprehension and our level of remorse and our level of shame, which is also a big part of it, up to such a high degree that I remember it, 43 years later or whatever it's been. So one by one, they had us line up alphabetically. One by one, they brought kids into the assistant headmaster's office, and Whittle was not last, but I was probably second or third to last. And so one by one, these boys go into this office, and he's in there for 5 or 6 minutes. And he comes out, and he's crying, and tears streaming down his face. "Did he cane you? Did he cane you?" He'd go downstairs, get his books, and go home. So you got to imagine, for me, at the back of this line, this is torture of the kind that you just can't imagine. So finally, I go in, and I stand there in front of these guys, and this guy looks up at me. And I was a really good student, and this guy says, "Mr. Whittle, we are more disappointed in you than we are in any of the other boys." And I know he said that to every single one of them. He says, "We really expected better than this from you. What do you have to say for yourself?" Now, by this time, I'm so traumatized, I'm just crying like a baby. And they just made you realize how absurd this was and how we expected better of you, and what do you think is going to happen to your life if you behave this way? So by now, I'm crying like a baby out of just raw shame and embarrassment. And they say, get out of here, and I don't ever want to see you in this office again. And so I walk out, and everybody said, they cane you, they can. I never did anything. They didn't have to. If they'd hit me, it wouldn't have been nearly as effective. Anyway, that's what I thought was a good education system. Worked for me. And this is what we need to do to American schools. We need to have private schools. And if you don't like that level of punishment, if you think that's harsh or excessive, certainly you could send kids to a school that don't have that. I will say one thing in passing about that level of discipline. When I moved from Bermuda to Miami about 2 years after that and went to the Dade County public school system, I was afraid for my life. There was so much violence in the school. This was in 1972. It's 100 times worse now. There was so much violence. There was so much threat of actual violence from students that everyone was terrified. And people say, oh, well, in this harsh discipline environment, kids can't blossom. They can't be the little snowflakes that they need to be so they can be creative. On the contrary, in a school that has that kind of strict discipline, you know exactly what the rules are, you know how to follow them, and you can relax. And you can feel relatively safe because evil is punished in a situation like this. It was civilized. So as far as the education question go, guys, I think the thing to do is to simply see if you can get them into private schools. And if you can't get a voucher, and it doesn't look like you will for a while, you have to, if you can, eat the cost of paying for your kid's education twice. You pay for it the first time through taxes. You pay for it again. Now, the homeschool movement's gotten very big, and I was somewhat concerned about the kind of the cultural health, the social health of kids, but I've talked to people who said, no, they're doing great. We hang out with other homeschool kids. Everything's fine. Their scores are certainly better. They're not bullied, because you don't voluntarily send your kid in to be bullied, do you? Big Proper there said progressive education turned schools into armed camps. That's exactly right. That's what progressive education did to the best educational system in the world. People used to come over here. They used to send ambassadors to America to study the public school system where everybody got a superb education. So I would try and get them into private schools, and if you couldn't do that, I'd homeschool them. And I think there's a gigantic market for somebody out there to make a series of homeschool standardized materials with a website and DVDs that basically would say, here are standards, and then all you'd have to do is buy into the program. I think you'd make a fortune doing that, and if I didn't have other plans for making a fortune, I'm pretty sure I would do that myself. Anyway, that's my little education rant. Let's see. I got two big things I want to talk about. You know, I was going to talk about the Frankfurt School, but it's getting late. I've only got about 20 minutes, and I could do a whole Frankfurt School. So, Benjamin, if you could think about bringing that next time, I'll bring that next time. I don't want to open it up without really getting a chance to really finish it, because I want to talk about critical theory and how all this stuff works, but I don't really have time to do that. Let me just check here. And I think it's Ray Carson had a question for about how does disdain for large government, is there a danger if it becomes disdain for the political system? Again, I hate to put the onus on you, but that is such a good question. I'd like to deal with that next time. That's something, again, I could do 20, 25 minutes on. The two things I want to close on are well, I'll start with this one from Randy McVeigh. How do you convince a liberal that they're wrong? I think that's such a good question. And it's a good segue into the last question, which I want to spend the last 15 minutes on. You can convince them. I did an event in Phoenix about a year ago with Tammy Bruce. Tammy Bruce is a radio talk show host who was a radical feminist lesbian who suddenly saw the light and became a solid, rock-solid voice of conservatism, a major, major asset to the team. We were walking out after this dinner. She was keynote speaker last year. I was keynote speaker that year, and they brought her back, so we were having fun talking about things. And she said to me something I never forgot. She said, Bill, do you realize just how weak not only the liberal argument is, but how weakly emplaced it is in people's minds? I said, what do you mean? She says, I'll go to do a lot of talks at universities, and I'll talk to kids who've been indoctrinated day and night for the last 3 or 4 years in this university, for the last 6 or 7 years in their high school. This is all they've ever known from TVs and movies. These people are liberals, and rock solid liberals. And Tammy said, I'll talk to them, and in 25 minutes, I'll have them flipped. And I've had that experience myself. I had that experience when I did the Tea Party rally in Minneapolis. The night before, we had a guy, this was right after Scott Walker, and we had a guy who was over from Wisconsin. This was in Minneapolis, but he was one of the guys out in the courthouse who was voting for public sector unions, and he was loud and bellicose, but I decided not to be that day. I'm not normally that calm. I have pretty thin skin, actually. I don't like being yelled at, and I tend to yell back, and it's a hard thing for me to control. But we were in a room full of Tea Party people, and they were all very quiet, and I asked them just to be quiet, deal with this guy one-on-one, and by the time we were over, he was saying, oh, yeah, it makes sense to have a flat tax where everybody pays the same rate, and yeah. It's incredible how easy it is to flip them. And I said to Tammy, you really make a good point. You really make a good point. And she said, this has caused me enormous hope over the last year and into the future too. She said, the thing about it is, Bill, the thing about light is that the presence of even the smallest amount of light destroys the darkness. Darkness has no power. Darkness only is darkness because of the absence of light. You can't put dark into a lit room. It's not like they compete with one another. It's not like you turn on the darkness and turn on the light and see who wins. Light illuminates things, and when there is no light, there is darkness, but when there is just a flickering candlelight, the room is lit. Dimly lit, but it's lit. Darkness has no power. And I have said repeatedly that truth is a lever. It's a powerful lever. That's why we are so horribly outnumbered in the media and in the culture, and we still, 50% in elections. If we had actual 50% access to the levers of culture and media in this country, the Democrats would never get above 25% again, ever, 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 at least not as the Democrats are constructed today. Then they'd go back to being what they used to be, which is a party that loved America and had different views about how to make her grow and defend her, but not what this leftism and this progressivism has done. So it's actually easy if you can get them to listen, and the way you get them to listen, I think, is a great conservative friend of mine named Adam Baldwin, the actor, the guy who was on, he started out in Full Metal Jacket, and he was on Firefly and Serenity. He was on Chuck for the last 5-6 years or something. He always plays a big tough guy with a machine gun who's screaming at the top of his lungs, but he's one of the most well-educated, best-read people I've ever met. And Adam said to me, when you argue with people, Bill, you have to give them honorable ground to retreat to. And otherwise, they're going to fight to the death in the trench. I thought, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. If there's a human wave coming up the hill and there's no surrender, if they're not going to take any prisoners, you'll fight to the death because you have no choice. But if you're offered an honorable ground to retreat to, honorable surrender, you can stack your arms, you can take your arms with you, you've done a noble job defending the fort, you've behaved heroically, and we salute you, we tip our hats to you, we don't want brave men like you to die. It sounds better to surrender that way. And that's how you convert people. Somebody just saw in the comments, didn't the Baldwins get bombed in South Park? Adam Baldwin is not related to Alex, Stephen, or William Baldwin. He's a Baldwin all his own. So you got to give people ground to retreat to, and the way I do that is by admitting where we're wrong in some cases. That's why I think of all the work I've done, it's not my best work. I think my best work is the atom bomb thing I did for PJTV. I think it's my best video work, certainly. But I think the most effective thing I've ever done, got a lot of hits, but it wasn't in the top 3 or 4 or 5 even, was, I think the most effective thing I've done. I think the thing I liked the best in terms of technique was Why We Suck. Because I thought about that. I thought about being heckled, I thought about, what would you say on the Mars show or the Tonight Show, and basically, you conservatives this and you conservatives that, you conservatives don't like this and you don't like this and you don't like that and you don't want this and you want people of that and you want this, blah, 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 blah. To which I would reply, what you're really asking me, Bill Maher, is why do we suck? Yeah. And then I would say, well, that's an excellent question. We suck because it sucks to be the guy who tells people you can't just keep eating free candy forever. That sucks. Sucks to be the guy that say things cost things. It's nice to be the guy who says all this stuff is free, have as much as you want. But it kind of sucks to be the adult who has to tell you that, no, it all has to be paid for somewhere. When you say things like why we suck, well, here's why we suck. Instantly the door is open. The door is open. They're not ready for it. And the other thing I think that you can do to convert a liberal is this is something that you can develop over time. I saw quickly in the comment section my old friend Andrew Breitbart, who I miss terribly. But Andrew Breitbart, more than anybody, understood what he called the dog whistle. And dog whistle as a term wasn't coined by Andrew, but dog whistle is the idea that there are messages that get sent out that some people are able to perceive, even though other people don't perceive them, at least not consciously. And Breitbart's understanding of the liberal dog whistle was that every question that comes to you from a progressive is constructed in such a way that you can't win. It really is a when did you stop beating your wife kind of thing. Breitbart saw that instantly. And a great example of Breitbart hearing the dog whistle was he was on a show, it might have been CNN or something, and they were doing a thing on the Tea Party, and they found the one sign among the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of signs that had an actual racist overtone, and there was a picture of Obama with a bone through his nose or something like that. Anybody who saw any of the Code Pink rallies and what they did about George Bush realizes no comparison, none. But anyway, they found that sign. So they said to Andrew, Andrew, you're big in the Tea Party movement. What do you think of this sign? Now, anybody other than Andrew Breitbart would have come out and would have said, well, I think it's despicable and it's repulsive and it's just a small number of people and blah, 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 blah. Would have done the whole song and dance, probably what I would have done. But Andrew Breitbart heard the dog whistle, and Andrew Breitbart said, why are you asking me this question? What do you mean, why are we asking you that question? Did I make the sign? Well, no. Then why don't you ask anybody else on the panel? They didn't make the sign either. You're asking me this question because you want to associate me and the movement with that one individual racist who's one person in the sea of 100,000 people, but why didn't you ask any of the other people that question? It puts them on the defensive. It pulls aside the curtain and shows you the little man moving the levers, producing the giant Oz with the steam coming out of his nose. So you have to be able to see past the dog whistle. And my favorite example of doing that personally, again, this was before I really got too politically aware. I'd already done eject, but I wasn't really doing the kind of interactive stuff I've been doing since PJTV in 2008. But I was in my last 2 or 3 weeks at my old job, which was as an editor for a show called Sunday Morning Shootout. It was a movie talk show on AMC with Peter Bart and Peter Gruber. Learned a lot about the business in that show. And I was in the cafeteria. Cafeteria is too strong a word. It was a kitchen, basically. And I was making myself some tea in the morning. And this new hire comes in. And I'd heard they'd hired a new girl. Now, this company had about 40 people working for it, and there were 2 conservatives, and I was one of them. And I was in the edit bay, and people would walk around the building, so they didn't have to walk past my door because you don't want to get infected by, good ideas. But I was doing ejects at this time, so I was pretty well known to be a conservative and real proud of it. I was kind of like the pet conservative. But they hired this new woman. She was probably 23 years old, and I'd never met her before in my life. I'm in the kitchen. I'm making some tea, and this 23-year-old woman comes into me, and she goes, "Are you that new editor? Are you that conservative editor I heard about? You must be that conservative editor I heard about." And I turned around and said, "Well, yes, I'm pleased to meet you too." You know, what a lovely thing to say. "Yes, hi, my name's Bill. What can I do for you?" And she said, without any smile, no introduction, no name or nothing, she said, "So you're the conservative guy?" "Yes." "So I guess you're opposed to protecting the environment." And I didn't have to think twice about this. I just said, "What environment do you want to protect?" "What? What environment do you want to protect?" "I don't understand the question." "Well, the Earth has been much, much hotter than it is now, and it's been much colder than it is now. There's been more carbon dioxide than there is now. There's been less carbon dioxide than there is now. Sea levels have been significantly higher than they are now, and they've been significantly lower than they are now. The Earth's climate is just a constant heartbeat of change and cycles. It's constantly in motion. So where do you want to stick a pin and flatline that heartbeat? What environment do you want to protect? Do you want to protect the 2007 environment? Do you want to protect the 1972 environment? Do you want to protect the 1483 environment? What environment do you want to protect?" And she looked at me, and then she turned around and walked away. And I'm not making that into like, hey, Bill, the giant killer thing, other than to say that what you really did was you questioned their assumption. She wasn't ready for that. What she was ready for is for me to say, hey, listen, global warming's crap. In which case she'd say, well, you obviously not intelligent enough to understand the science. Or, hey, I don't care if the Earth burns as long as I get my Camaro and I get to have my fast car and my big house. But I'm not going there. I'm going to the science. And I had a similar situation with somebody when they were talking about this global warming thing. And I said, I just saw a documentary on Discovery Channel with, I think it was Tom Brokaw, sitting in front of an ocean, with a couple of random icebergs in the background. And he said, the Arctic Ocean has not been thawed in July or whatever. At this time of year, there's not been a pack ice behind me for 30 million years. Global warming is real. And I immediately watched this and I said, whose SUVs caused it to be liquid 30 million years ago then, Tom? If you're saying that it hasn't been like this for 30 million years, but 30 million years ago was exactly like it is right now, who caused it back then? They're not ready for these kind of answers or this kind of thinking. They don't know what to do. And when you get to that place, you realize you put a shiv in that armor, and then the whole thing basically just shatters into glass. It just comes to pieces. You can't. They don't know how to argue it. You know why they don't know how to argue it? They don't know how to argue it because they've never had to. This is why we're so much better at this than them. We suffer the penalty of being conservatives every day in this country because the culture and the media are so overwhelmingly liberal, and we pay the psychic price of having this assault on our values every single day. And I know it's unbearable. Believe me, nobody gets it more than me, and nobody suffers from it more than me. I'm a victim. But as conservatives, you know what I'm talking about. But what's really happening is it means we have to hear them every day. We have to listen to their arguments every day. In order to remain conservative, we have to be prepared to counter that argument. We have to understand the alternative. We have to do our research. We have to understand why we don't agree with what everybody else says, and it makes us much, 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 much stronger than them. Any dead block of wood can flow downstream, but if you're going to swim upstream, you got to be a salmon, baby. You got to be one of these super fit, super healthy, life force driven little fish. You've seen pictures of waterfalls. I've seen salmon go not upstream. I've seen them go vertically through a stream of descending water. That's something that's alive. That is a fit creature. So conservatives, at least conservatives who are in this fight, are infinitely more mentally fit, better educated, better able to respond, better able to think on their feet than these liberals are. And so to close your question, Randy, it's easy to convince them because they've never had to be convinced. They've never had to argue. They cannot defend their own positions ever. I heard there was, I think it might have been Vince Vaughn, who's actually fairly conservative, I've heard, was on a set arguing with somebody, and they made an argument, and Vince Vaughn said, your argument not only doesn't make sense, it's wrong. I shouldn't have to argue your side for you. Go do some homework and then come back to me and I'll destroy you then. So it's not as hard as it looks, but don't fall into the trap and don't hear the dog whistle. Give them something different than what they expect. And then the final question I'm going to take tonight, I got about 8 minutes left, is Billy Davis asks, will you write a book? And I didn't save this for last to promote my book, but I do have a book. I'm going to reissue it shortly. I've got so much work to do. I've got a bunch of firewalls in the can. I need to get those finished. But I will reissue Silent America. But that's not what I'm talking about. That book was written in 2005. America's fundamentally changed since then. Barack Obama has changed this country. I don't think he's permanently changed it, but he certainly changed the mood. But I wanted to talk to you guys just briefly about something I'm thinking about developing as a book. And I just really had the thought kind of crystallize earlier today as a happy coincidence. I'm thinking about calling it King of the Hills. And here's the theory that I'm thinking I might explore in this book. Let's say that anything in society, anything that human beings do, has an optimum, right? An optimum. And I don't know why I thought of this example. It had something to do with some story I saw about underage teenage sex or something, and then I had this thought, and I said, even though there's variations between people, society, let's say, what would be the optimum age for losing your virginity? It's something we can all connect to, so let's just chat this out to see where I'm going with this thing. Certainly before a certain age, it's too early, and way before a certain age, it's horrifically destructive. And likewise, you can get on the other side of that curve, where the later and later and later you get, that's also not good. And some people die virgins. That's certainly not good for them either, I wouldn't think, unless it was a conscious choice on their part to go live in a monastery or something. So what you get is you get a bell curve, right? You get a bell curve, and all of these bell curves look differently dependent on what you're talking about. But it is a bell curve. And in the middle, at the absolute center, at the top of that hill, is the optimum range. So let's just say, for the sake of the argument, that it's 18. 18 years old is the optimum age, let's say, for you to lose your virginity. So earlier than 18, the earlier you go, the further away from 18 you go early, like, 8, 6, terrible. As you get closer and closer and closer to 18, it gets better and better and better, gets more and more optimal, and then as you get past the prime, it starts to descend, and the climb doesn't look like the descent, it's a different slope and so on. But 18, as an example, is optimal. You make the same case for taxes. There is a tax rate where you lower taxes and the revenues increase because the economy is growing because of lower taxes. So you're getting a slightly smaller piece of a much bigger pie, and that's called the Laffer curve. But again, you can look at it as kind of a hill, like a bell curve, right? There is an optimal tax rate, which produces the most revenues for the government. And you may have to raise the tax rate. Sometimes you have to lower the tax rate, but the revenues will peak, and on one side it's lower, and on the other side it's lower. Now we get to where I want to do the book. I think, you have to stay with me on this, I think that everything leading up to the top of the hill is liberalism, right? And everything from the top of the hill down on the other side is conservatism. And what I mean by that is this. If we were still talking about, take race for example, if we were still talking about a society where black people were denied the right to vote, I would be a liberal. I would be on the side of increasing those rights so that everybody had the right to free expression that they should have under natural law. Everyone should have a right to vote. There are certain education things I'll put in there, but I'm speaking in broad terms here. So everything prior to everyone having a right to vote fairly and freely up until the top of that hill, I'm a liberal. And then when I get to the top of the hill, when I reach the point of optimum benefit, that's when I become a conservative, because to go any further with it is to decrease optimum outcome. And certainly, using race as an example, we passed the top of that hill a long time ago. That's why I'm a conservative. I think we've gone too far. We're at the point now where we have these racial set-asides, and we say things like, liberals say things like, well, you can't require IDs because it's anti-minority. Says who? You're telling me a black person can't go down and get an ID? What an insulting thing to say. I would never, ever, ever would I be that condescending and that racist to make a statement that these kind of progressives make all the time. You can apply this to everything. Feminism, for example, if women are required to be in the kitchen, not as a choice, but if they're required, if there are no job opportunities, women can't do anything, they can't fly airplanes, they can't do anything, I'm in favor of liberalizing this until we get to the top of the hill. And the top of the hill is maximum human freedom without the kind of coercion and set-asides and punitive stuff like Chapter 9, where feminists have basically pulled resources away from things like boys' football and put into girls' football, and the girls don't play football. They don't want to play football. So it becomes punitive. You're on the other side of that hill. The top of the hill is where you flip from being a liberal to a conservative. And on things where I don't think we've reached optimal results yet, I'm a liberal. But frankly, the reason I describe myself as a conservative is because in modern America, we passed the optimal point on all of these societal things a long, long, long time ago. A long time ago. The Republican Party was a very liberal party in the traditional understanding of the word. And by the way, this is why when you really get down to brass tacks and you talk about modern conservatism, I'm not the first person to say this, needless to say, but modern conservatives are traditional liberals. They are the liberals of the revolution. The beliefs that the people in the revolution had were liberal beliefs, and those beliefs were things like limited government was a liberal idea because society was so oppressive. You living under kings and emperors and dukes and earls and priesthoods. So it was liberal to get rid of all that stuff and to have limited government. It's a liberal idea. And likewise, so many of these things, private property in an age where the king owed everything was a liberal idea. But once you get to the point where everybody understands that private property is good, everybody understands that a republic that limits power is good, when you get to that point, to take it further is to take you down the slope on the backside. And that's when you need to stop being a liberal and start becoming a conservative, because everything that happens from this point forward is worse. It's worse. We got 1 minute to go, so I'll close this thought out here. I was talking with Jeremy Boring about this earlier today. Jeremy and I are big fans of The Lord of the Rings. We're both solid conservatives. He grew up that way. I came that way. I had to come to this conclusion. But one of the hallmarks of conservatism is that we are getting worse, that people are not getting smarter. People are getting stupider. They're getting less wise. They're getting less industrious. I don't think you have to look real hard and listen to the music you hear today for this to be a particularly tough sell. One of the most damning things I ever saw about rap music was simply this. They took the musical score of a rap song, which is dot, 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 ding, dot, 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 and they compared it to Thelonious Monk and Scott Joplin, two black composers, which are spectacularly complex. It's devolving. It's degenerating. Of course you want to be a conservative. You want to hang on to these things now. We've passed the top of all these hills. We've gone way too far. So you have to figure out where the hill is, and you have to figure out where to make them stand. But here's the thing I was talking about with Jeremy. Conservatives can connect to a line. Let's go back to Lord of the Rings, because it's always a great way to end the show, because it's so deep. It's so deep. Theoden, the king of the Rohirrim, the horse people, is utterly, utterly tormented by the idea that he is, in his own words, in the character's own words, lesser son of greater fathers, that his ancestors did much greater things that he did, that he's not measuring up to what came before. He's a failure in the eyes of his ancestors. He is the lesser son of greater fathers. I connect to that. I think the current generation, my generation, is lesser in many ways than not just the greatest generation, than the pioneer generation, the founders generation, and it's certainly including the guys who were in Bastogne, and the guys that went up Mount Suribachi, the guys that stood on Missionary Ridge. Better people than us. Complained about nothing compared to what I complain about. Had all kinds of moral integrity and work ethic that I don't have. They had a life force that I don't have. They're better people. And conservatives are comfortable with saying that, but progressives, you could never, ever, ever get a progressive to say that, because progressives always feel that the future, the paradise, the perfect world, the new man is out in front of us. And this is an insight I had talking to Jeremy about this. Progressives will never say that they're lesser sons of greater fathers, and I think that you can probably get this down to this. Progressives won't ever agree to that, because that would mean that they themselves are not the precious, perfect snowflake that is such a key part of their psychology. That's why Barack Obama wouldn't go to Wisconsin and lose with his troops. He can't lose. He can't lose. He wins at everything he does. What kind of child thinks that? A good general who gets walloped stands in front of his men and says, "Men, we got walloped. We got walloped because of my fault. It was my fault. I wasn't prepared. We got slack. They handed us our butts. And if we don't want our butts handed to us again, we need to get our act together and go out there and beat these people. We need to whip them out of their boots." Barack Obama can't do that. Progressives can't do that, because the idea that the best of times is behind them is to pull them out of their unearned moral and intellectual superiority, which is the coin of their realm, which is the only reason they get up in the morning, is to swap trading cards with other progressives that say, "Wow, you're a very smart guy. Yes, thank you. You're very smart yourself. And by the way, you're an extremely moral person. Yes, I'm in favor of of freeing Tibet." "Really? Are you? You're in favor of freeing Tibet?" "Yes. What do you do?" "Well, I have a bumper sticker on my Prius that says free Tibet." "Oh, well, then obviously you're a fine, better person, much better person than these Marines, these knuckle-dragging savages who actually could free Tibet." You know where this goes from here, right? So that's what I'm thinking about developing into a book. I want to call it King of the Hills, and I want to look at how all of the values that we should cherish together, liberals and conservatives, can be assessed in terms of their optimum settings, prior to which you should become a liberal and ask for more of it, and once you achieve it, you should become a conservative and fight any additional changes that lower that optimum as hard as you possibly can. I think that's a good philosophical defense for conservatism, and I wish more people were making it, but you know what? We got 172 current, 476 total views. This show is slowly increasing in size. I'm going to start promoting it next week, because this is the first time in 3 weeks where I didn't have a bandwidth failure and have to restart. And let me tell you something, folks, there's nothing that pulls you off a train of thought than having the video just go black. That's all we have time for tonight. As usual, next Tuesday we'll put up a post in the afternoon. I was a little late today, sorry about that. On Facebook, you put your questions in there. If you didn't get to you tonight, I deeply apologize. We had some terrific questions. We just had really, really terrific questions as usual. I'm going to go out and get a little rest. Going to work on finishing the firewall tomorrow. Hopefully have it up on Thursday. It's called "Why Don't You Mind My Own Business?" and it's about the ethics of Obamacare. It uses that great expression that is my perfect slogan about liberal thinking, progressive thinking, which is, well, yes, it works in practice, but will it work in theory? So we'll take a look at the theory of Obamacare. That'll be coming for you in a couple days. It's always a pleasure talking to you fine people. Thank you, as always, for the tremendous comments, the tremendous support I get from you time and time again. And if you have a chance to invite other people to this website, if you follow the link on that we set up today, they'll come back and there'll be the archives, and I'll have the show archived. And anything we can do to get me more Facebook friends is a means of just getting the message out there wider. So I appreciate all the help you can get. And again, the comments, I never forget them. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week on the Stratosphere Lounge. You have a good evening. Bye-bye now.